the story of Yamcha. Yamcha was the bandit. He found Goku. He said, he said, boy, what are you doing? You have that powerful. Who'd you get that from? He said, that was my grandpa Gohan. He said, damn, I knew of a man named Gohan once, and I know if they pull, it's going to be mine. And then they ended up fighting. Yamcha found out about Goku's strength early on. And after that day, he was like, that's my boy. I'm his friend, and I'll do the best I can to support my guy, even if he's better than me, And at that point, from that point on, he also saw Goku do all kinds of amazing things. He took a back real quick, kind of. But he was there to cut off Goku's tail when he became a Great Ape. When Pilaf took him, Por, Oolong, Bulma, and him and trapped him. He saw the full moon and then he became an Ozaru. And he was like, oh shit, I'll have to, drop his tail off. But Yamcha grew attraction for Bulma, who he couldn't talk to at first, but then they kind of, were a thing a little bit. Yamcha, I don't think he participated in the first martial arts tournament. He participated in the next one. But he was also there to see Goku through, to see Baba Yaga. At that point, Baba Yaga, brought his grandfather back, but he had to fight against some people in that place where Baba Yaga was at. He won his fight, I think, if I remember correctly. This is Dragon Ball. I know Dragon Ball is, cool, and I do, but I don't like he calls to Yamcha's backstory as much. He's a side character that people don't like because of Dragon Ball Z. But some people are Yamcha fans out there, so this is for you. Yamcha also was impressed when Goku went into the Red Ribbon Army and he destroyed him. He was like, he told Por, he was like, go over there and see if there's any sign of life over there. And then Por went over there, his cat, magical cat, and he was like, no, Yamcha, there's no life. There's no life there. There's no sign of life over there. And he's like, damn, my boy went in there and like cleaned fucking house. And then during the Yaga incident, he saw Goku as an innocent child. He's like, I kind of don't see my guy this way, but it's hard to, sometimes you forget that he's a kid and he, does have those type of feelings and shit. But Yamcha was still a side character that didn't do too much. What I'm saying here is tournament where Tien Shinhan was in, he was going to fight Tien Shinhan before the fucking match because he was kind of being disrespectful to, some females or something, or some other people, an old man. And he was like, yo, I could kill you right now, said Tien. And he was like, you saved that fool's life because Roshi, grabbed Yamcha and was like, no, you can't fight against him. Tien or Yamcha, fought in the tournament and he ended up losing, of course, as usual. Then he was there to watch over the dead bodies of Krillin and Roshi. So then when the Dragon Balls came into play again, they could bring them back to life. They were brought back to life. Then another time skip happened, and Yamcha was still there. He was, like, hey, Goku, you're going to participate in this tournament? And, he saw Goku was taller, and he was like, damn, that's my friend. We haven't seen each other in a while, but I've gotten stronger too. He's like, yeah, but you're still just Yamcha. He took Goku's clothes from him and he was like, damn, Goku, you've been, really fucking training a different fucking way from all the rest of us, And he was just a side character from there, and truly a side character, because then Dragon Ball Z happened. Now, he had grown his hair out, and, like on the thumbnail, he was like, Goku, he died, because he died fighting against Raditz, and he was like, now we have to defend the world against aliens, essentially, Saiyans who are coming. So I have to make sure my skills are on par. He honed his Wolf Fang Fist attack. He honed his um, new attack called the Spirit Ball attack. And during this time, the only feat that Yamcha really has in Dragon Ball Z is defeating a Saberman. So when he did that, he used his Wolf Fang Fist and he was, fighting against it. But then, acid, he dodged it, then he hit the spirit ball attack down on him, defeated it. But he was like kind of like celebrating too much. Krillin was like, hey, Yamcha, behind you. Then he died. And, the Yamcha pose where he's like, all rolled up, dead, crawled up dead. And then he was the first one to go to Genkai because he died. Then he was watching the Frieza fight and everything on Namek unfold. He was like, King Kai, what's going on with Goku? He's like, yo, Goku might fucking lose this battle. But then he saw Goku go into the Super Saiyan and he was like, yo, guys, we actually, might see Goku win, but I don't know how he's going to get out of Namek. Yamcha got wished back to life. Then, he had his struggles with Bulma. He lost Bulma at this point. This is when he lost Bulma because Vegeta was there. The Batman shirt went to Vegeta and he was just there like, oh, fuck. He was just there after that. But he still fought in the Android Saga, or tried to. They went to a town and they were waiting for the androids to appear. It's 3 years later from the time Goku talked to Trunks. And then they're like, okay, well, the androids will appear here. And he got his energy zapped by Dr. Gero. Then, he took a sense of being and let them know, these androids have the ability to take away your energy, zap your energy away. Then he took Goku when he got sick, and he took him back to Kame House. And he's like, yes, you get better, Goku, because we'll need you during the fight. He stayed in the lookout, when Goku and the other Saiyans, needed to train to fight against Cell. He was just up there, like, damn, I won't make a difference against this monster. I couldn't even do shit against the androids. But then he was there at the Cell games. He had to fight against Cell Juniors and shit. He cut his hair down during this arc too, by the way. It kind of looked like, Adult Gohan. Well, Adult Gohan took Yamcha's hairstyle. But Yamcha, did, shoot Cell with a little bit of, energy. Boom, 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 boom. To like distract him a little bit so Gohan could, hit the final, blow on him to defeat him. Then Yamcha was just, basically an older man at that point. He was just like, hey, Goku's coming back for a day. Hey, Goku, how's, everything going? And he's like, yeah, it's cool to see Yamcha, and Yamcha was just there. Then Yamcha was, also up at the lookout because Majin Buu was killing people like crazy. Then Super Buu appeared up there in the lookout. He killed Chi-Chi because Chi-Chi couldn't hold herself back. She was like, where's my son? She slapped Super Buu and was like, what the fuck happened to my son? Then he was like, I'll turn you into fucking food, bitch. You don't do shit like that. And then Yamcha was like, hey, him and Krillin, attacked, but then, they ended up becoming, dinner too. They ended up dying, and then they saw Kid Buu, when he fucking came to Otherworld. Like, whoa, we're already dead. How the fuck are you here anyways? Yeah. But then he got wished back to life, and he was still around when Beerus came. He made no difference. He just saw Beerus and was like, damn. He was just basically standing there for the rest of the time. Didn't even make it into the Tournament of Power. He was there for a, baseball match between Champa and Beerus, which I think that's a filler episode, by the way, but still, like, he got hit with the attack, and, the old, Yamcha, gas downs and everything else, he was sitting down in his dead pose. Yamcha probably won't ever be anything ever again, but he was one of Goku's first friends, and that's why I had to talk about him. He's a supportive character, not in physical abilities, but, that's my friend Yamcha, who I always knew, and other things. I can talk to him at the cookout. I could, do this with him and that with him, that type of thing. But that's it, and that's the story of Yamcha. One of the worst side characters in Dragon Ball Z. The weakest human out of the Z fighters. Oh, besides Yamcha, Roby. But that's the story of Yamcha, as told by Darius the Green Angel. Be cool, call in the corner.